Arthur, tell me briefly, what is Family Fundamentals about?
Well, Family Fundamentals basically is my exploration and my examination of a passionate subject that I've been exploring, and that is the separation of church and state. Specifically, I use families to explore that. I use these families as microcosms to look at the larger debates over homosexuality. I chose to make Family Fundamentals by, in terms of looking at specific families as a way to really explore larger issues and debates over homosexuality in this country. And each one of them represent sort of a different look at the debate. One family is a political family. One family is involved in reparative therapy. And a third family has, as one of the parents, a leader of a church. And I felt that these are the different arenas that this debate plays out in, amongst other arenas, but these specific arenas I was most interested in. You know, with the case of Brian Bennett, his story was pretty well known back in '97 when he first came out, being the aide of Bob Dornan. And I was always fascinated about, well, I wonder what that was like, you know, how did they get along? But I was always very careful in the research for this story to make sure that I just didn't approach people. You know, I made sure, because with as you know, in some cases, once they say no is no, and I didn't want that to happen. So I asked Rich Taffel from the Log Cabin Republicans group to introduce me to Brian, and through that introduction, Brian was receptive to me just in approaching him. But with Brian, you know, he was very smart. You know, I think because of his training, he had good training from Bob Dornan. He knows what the media can or cannot do, and he wanted to see every one of my films before he agreed to do this. So that's how I found Brian.
The guy who grew up Mormon, was
Brett?
Brett.
Yeah.
Yes. How did you find Brett?
Well, Brett, I met actually in a social setting. He was, you know, he was ousted from the military because of being gay. And he was at a screening, actually, of Coming Out of Fire. And so we knew each other from there. And he just casually asked me what I was working on. And I said, well, I explained to him. And he says, well, you know, my father's a Mormon, which, you know, and that conflict fit exactly into one of the story profiles that I wanted to focus on, which is a family that had a church leader and a gay son.
Now imagine when you go to your subjects, you know, whether it's Brett or Brian and Susan, they might possibly be hesitant to actually be the subject of the documentary.
Yeah.
Since you did have them on and you've gone through the process, and I imagine some of them have seen the final work,
Yeah.
why do you think they ultimately decided they wanted to participate, or what do you think what did they finally come to understand that, you know, what was the reason for them to actually be part of your film?
Well, their participation, you know, is complicated. I think on one level, I think it was a way for them to communicate. It was a way for them to reach out to their parents because before then they weren't able to. It was a way for them to talk about this very heated topic called homosexuality that, you know, for them in the past, once it was brought up, it would end up in shouting matches or unspoken words and total denial. So this was a way for them to say, this is what I feel, listen. I think on another hand, all the people that I eventually had in the film, they're very politically aware and passionate about the issues that I'm passionate about. And I think they wanted to further what they felt was their point of view and to have people understand that this is the conflict and this is a problem and we need to do something about it.
Tell me particularly what was challenging in Brett's situation.
And Brett's, well, you know, Brett, you know, the Mormon culture is very insular. The families are very tight-knit, and you know, the community itself has loosened up in the past decades, but before they were even more close-knit because of the persecution that they experienced. And when we approached them to participate in this film, they actually said yes. We were both surprised. And we asked them 3 times, in fact, to make sure you know what it means to say yes. You need to sign a release and let us follow you with a camera. And they said, oh, yeah, we understand. and we arrived in Salt Lake City to start shooting, and I started shooting. And when it got down to sitting down with them to sign a release, well, they actually said, well, we're not sure. And it was like a shock to me because they had said yes, they promised. And I've never had that happen to me before. And the challenge was then, well, what do I do with this story? What was funny was they allowed me to keep on shooting. They never said no. They always said, we have to pray on this. We have to pray about it and consult, and talk about it with ourselves. So they never said no, so they still allowed me to shoot. And I came back with some really great stuff, some really intimate and loving moments between this family that was having this conflict. And that's what I was trying to show, that it's not black and white. It's very complicated. There's a lot of gray areas in this situation. So I came back and started cutting it together and anticipating that they wouldn't sign, but was always hopeful. And it was a challenge to me as a filmmaker to include their point of view in a three-dimensional manner, but not actually have them. And I actually enjoyed that challenge creatively, and I felt I think I met it up to a certain point. It would have been a different film with their 100% participation, but I feel that I honored them as well in terms of their point of view and acknowledged their point of view in the final cut.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I like what you did with showing, as much as you could show.
Yeah.
Tell me briefly about how you think the fact that some of these parents believe that their children choose to be homosexual, like, do you think that still allows them to have some kind of connection with their kids?
Well, I think, I'll never really know their true feelings inside their hearts, because that's very personal, and if even they know themselves. But I believe that there is love there, and I believe that the parent-child relationship is there on a certain level, and you can't disconnect that, no matter how much you disagree. I think it's oftentimes a way for parents to deal with their child's homosexuality by saying it's a learned behavior, because they can say, well, then if it's learned, it can be fixed. And I know that the religious right uses that notion politically as a way to counter the call for gay civil rights, because they're saying, well, if it's a learned behavior, well, why should we give you special rights for learned behavior? So it's a strategy that the religious right uses and pushes to its membership, which includes the parents that I have in this film. So how much of it is brainwashing on their end in terms of what they've learned from their religious leaders, I'm not sure. How much of it is because they truly believe that their kids have chosen or have learned this homosexuality as a type of lifestyle or behavior. I think it could be a mix of all that. And it's very complicated, and it's not easy to persecute one side or the other.
What I find really interesting in your film is you really get to see your subjects really grappling with this tension within them, because especially with the parents, they love their kids, and yet their religion really tells them to think a certain way. Can you tell me specifically, in the case of Susan and Kathleen, a little bit about that tension?
Yeah.
And what you saw. Susan says that she'll always love Kathleen, and tell me a little bit about their relationship with each other, and Susan's still wanting to be accepted.
Yeah, I think with Susan and Kathleen, you have this, decades relationship, pulling back and forth, and with their story, I try to touch a little bit upon their past in terms of the tensions actually before the homosexuality issue came up. That there is a mother and daughter tension here going on. There is a mother who sees her daughter in a certain kind of way. There's the whole molestation aspect of their story in terms of Susan's stepfather abusing her sexually. There's the violence in the home, where Susan explains that it was a violent home and the stepfather beat her mother constantly. And these are issues to be considered as well in their relationship. And it's not just the homosexuality aspect. However, that homosexuality issue is one that's easy to point at. You know, it's a tangible issue that someone like Kathleen can hold on to and say, this is the problem. This is what we need to fix, as opposed to looking underneath the layers of their lives. And I think that reflects on how homosexuality is used politically in this country. Is that here it is, this issue that we can say is immoral, that we can use as a fundraiser tool in the fundamentalist community. We know that that's done. It's used to incite and to get people riled up so that they will join and pay the dollars to support a Jerry Falwell, for example. We know this. This is not, this is fact. So, you know, what I'm trying to explore in this film is also what is the real problem here? You know, is it homosexuality, or are we looking at social conditioning? Are we looking at politics? Are we looking at religious education or the media? And it's all kind of mixed in for me.
Interesting about when you talk about religion, and particularly two of your subjects, Brett and Brian. Do you think, if not those two, do you think some of them still yearn to be accepted by the faith that they grew up in?
Oh yeah, I just don't think. You know, what's interesting about the stories in Family Fundamentals is, in terms of the gay and lesbian characters in the film, is that yes, they've maintained their religious values. They've just learned to adjust it accordingly. They've learned to grow out of the oppressive part of it. They've learned to come out of it as whole human beings, which I find very inspiring, despite what they've been taught and brainwashed to think for decades when they were learning as a child. It's a huge battle. I don't come from a religious background, but I did have to struggle with the whole question of sexuality and the oppressive parts of that exploration. But to add on a religious aspect, another layer to the oppression, I said, that's double trouble. It's like, how difficult can that be? Very difficult. And they came out of it as whole human beings, which is really terrific.
I'm not sure Lisa will end up using a clip of when Brian talks about his finding out that the church, the Catholic Church or the Christian Church, Catholic Church once did have common attitudes about gay people. But can you tell me a little bit about setup about that?
Yeah.
When you were shooting that, and what you were asking him or showing him at that point.
You know, what's wonderful about this project, which was very liberating for me, was I was a one-man band. I got hold of one of these small digital cameras. I did sound myself. I shot it myself. And what that gave me was the freedom to just be with my subjects in any setting that I felt was right or shootable or maybe not, and I just shot anyway. That particular scene was pretty much an accident. We had spent the whole evening watching old home movies that Brian gave to me, and I invited him over to my office to look at the movies to help me identify some of the characters. And I used some of the clips, the home movies in the film itself. We're having pizza and beer, and that day I also received some footage from the CNN archives. And I said, oh, do you want to see it? So we just walked over to my editing room, and I put it on for him. I said, oh, do you mind me videoing you watching the footage? I didn't really think about it. I said, well, this might be interesting to use later. I don't know. Of course, the footage that I showed him was heart-wrenching because it reminded him of a very important part of his life when he realized that, yes, I can be Catholic and homosexual. Yes, there is a level of oppression that I didn't know about, and that I can come out of this somehow. And it was a very important moment in his coming out process. And there was flashing before him that at that moment, replaying. And I was shooting it on video, because I had this little camera. And the clip finished, and he just turned around and started talking about it. And it was a very emotional time for him back then, and still is. For me, as a filmmaker, with this liberating process of being a one-man band kind of production, I think I just really got some of the most emotional moments in any of my films just by using this process.
In a lot of documentaries, filmmakers make use of letters to people.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a bit about how you use letters and family fundamentals to have
Okay.
your subjects communicate with each other.
Well, with Brett's story, his parents had, although they had agreed to participate in the film, they rescinded their cooperation. And I was stuck with, well, what do I do with this story? Because I really did indeed want to explore both sides of the story and explore their points of view. So my challenge was, how do I do this without them? Luckily, Brett gave me permission to read and then use the letters that he received from his parents. Hundreds of letters, which were, ranged from being very loving to very concerned and suggestive of what he can do to fix himself in terms of his sexual orientation. And I looked through them and I said, this is their voice, and so I used them as their character. And I was very careful in choosing for me, what was a balance of emotions, from really a heart-wrenching sense of missing their child, losing that connection with one's child, to preaching to him, saying you must change and you must go through these processes and you must go to confession and you must come out of this, and you will, and seek the eternal life that we as Mormons wish for and work for here on earth.
Feel a sense of difference in this documentary as opposed to the other documentaries you produced because of you're a one-man person?
Oh yeah. It's I think going at it without a crew, making a film without a crew and just with you and the camera, only works for certain kind of films. At least that's what I think. I'm not sure. I haven't done it beyond this one project, but I felt unencumbered. I didn't have to worry about my camera guy or the sound person or my PA. It was just, it was almost like a conversation, really, or just hanging out with somebody, and without anybody else around us. It's really wonderful. I mean, it was, I want to do it again. So yeah, it changed my approach to the film. The footage that I got back really informed how I was going to put the film together, informed what kind of elements I was going to use, like music, and archival footage. It really helped shape the entire piece, the actual shooting of it. Yeah, I'll do it again.
Do you find yourself sometimes separating yourself from your subjects, since you were spending so much time with them and you were starting to get more, intimate with them? How were you able to be sort of an objective?
A filmmaker?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
What was your strategies to do that as a filmmaker?
Do you want the answer now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think especially with my last film, License to Kill, which was about killers of gay men, and this current film, I had to maintain a certain amount of separation. I had to say, I'm a journalist, I'm here to get the story, but I had to also be there to provide a safe space for the people to be open and to be comfortable in speaking about some very personal matters that I wanted to explore with them. But I always remember, I never forgot that I am the filmmaker and I'm here to do a job. My job here is ultimately to get stuff for the editing room so I can put a film together. I never forget that. But I think, I've been around for a long time and I've been doing this for a while, that whole part of me doing a job here as a journalist, as a director, as a writer, it's ingrained in me. It's a part of me anyway. So I don't find myself actually having to consciously think of it anymore, because it's just a part of what I do. So really what I'm more concerned with is is providing that safe space so that the subject and I can communicate and really go deeply into matters that they may not necessarily do if I wasn't around. And hopefully, that safe space is laid out for them in a way that they feel they can walk down that path with me, and that's what I'm more concerned with. And in keeping the distance, that's already a given. I think that's just a natural part of me anyway now, that I don't think about it. And I have to trust my gut feelings. I mean, and that's the thing I've had to learn, is to trust my instincts and go with the gut feelings and say, this is right, and just do it, because it's right.
Great, thanks. Getting back to, you were starting to talk about reparative thinking is pretty widespread, especially in
Yeah.
sports.
I think for me, when I delve into a film, it has to resonate in larger social issues and political issues. Although I often deal with these issues by looking at personal stories and see how it plays out in personal, private lives. For this film, a large part of what I wanted to explore was the whole notion of reparative therapy, especially how the religious right uses this as a political tool. We hear about we hear often from the religious right their point of view that homosexuality is something you can fix. Therefore, you aren't allowed special rights. Why should we give you special rights when it's something you can figure out in psychology or with drugs or with shock treatment? And in this regard, the whole notion of change, of being able to change from homosexual to heterosexual, is very widespread in many different communities. And as it shows in all three of the stories in Family Fundamentals, we have a woman, Kathleen Bremner, who proposes reparative therapy as a way to fix the family situation that she deals with in the film, with her Spatula Ministries group, her parent support group. We have Bob Dornan, a congressman, who on the Senate floor proposes that this is not a natural phenomenon. This is a behavior pattern that must be eliminated. And with Brett's family, his Mormon family, his father being a bishop of the ward that he lives in, proposes solutions that are mandated by church, that are organized by his church, with therapy. I mean, it's for them, it's a natural solution, reparative therapy, of course. When I first set out on this project, I knew that my goal of including people who I don't agree with, the more conservative people with certain values and beliefs about homosexuality, I figured they wouldn't want to talk to me. Why would they? If they look up my name in the internet, they'll find out what kind of films I make, and they're basically pretty liberal in terms of point of view. So to circumvent that from happening from the outset, I put together a panel of advisors that included conservative advisors, included people that they would recognize, names that they would recognize, or organizations that they would recognize, to let them see that I'm doing my homework, that I'm putting myself on guard, that I'm not out there to skewer them, that I wasn't out to demonize them, that I was really sincerely hopeful to explore this issue from their point of view as well. But reminding them that I was going to talk to the kids too, and that this was a film that I believe was very unique, and hopefully they would recognize that fact. And I think the people I approached who eventually agreed to be in the film are thoughtful people. They are concerned, and they do want things to be better. And we do share common goals of happiness and families that are close and loving. It's just that they have different ways of seeing that. But bottom line is we all want the same thing in regards to family and closeness. It's just how do you accomplish that with homosexuality being thrown into the ring. So I think they agreed to be a part of this film because they wanted to explore that question too. Is it possible? You know, is it possible for us to find common ground? Is it possible for us to get along despite vast differences in principles? And they care a lot about their family. I believe that. And that's partly why I think they agreed to be a part of this project, because they want to contribute to possibly finding some way to alleviate the pain, you know, to soften some of the conflict, you know, so that their families can come together.
Tell me a little bit about your intended audience for this film, how that all plays into,
Yeah.
you know, who you want to actually see the film, and what are your hopes for your audiences to walk away from?
Well, from the beginning, I really wanted to focus on two audiences. One is a conservative audience that may not necessarily watch a program about homosexuality unless it was like something like The Gay Agenda, the 20-minute short that the Religious Right produced some decade or two ago, that really showed only one part of the gay community and chose images that they knew that would incite their followers into disagreement over the issue. And one would argue that they also perpetuate a lot of myths that weren't true about our community in that video, The Gay Agenda. And this is what this target audience that I wanted to reach watches when they want to watch something about homosexuality. These are the images that they adhere to, that they remember, that they point to and say, this is the gay community, this is what we're against. Not that that's not a part of our community, but it was done in a way that was insightful. I wanted to reach this audience with a different point of view. I wanted to, in many ways, make it palatable for them. And which is a large part of my whole production, in going back and forth with my advisors, my conservative advisors, asking them, what would your people say? How would they react to this film? What can I adjust here? Maintaining my integrity as a filmmaker, but what can I adjust to make it just a little easier for them to watch this film and learn something about a community that they've been so fearful of, that they've been holding in such disdain, you know, and I specifically chose families to focus on, because how more universal can you be than with family? There's no question that we all have families and want families, regardless of our backgrounds. This is the common thread that I wanted to push forward with this film, about a topic that they may not necessarily want to talk about, or if they're going to talk about it, in negative terms. So a main part of my target audience is that conservative audience. And I think it's working, you know, I think it's working. I've made sure that their values are reflected in the film, that their beliefs are reflected in the film and acknowledged in a respectful manner. But at the same time, I'm also showing them the pain that their beliefs cause, the conflict that their beliefs cause in their families, you know, and they can't deny that. But what's also very important for me is for this film to go out to the gay community. I think there's no argument that things are getting better, things have gotten better, and things will progress, but there's sometimes a level of complacency in our community when things are good, that we get kind of settled in, and it's oftentimes we forget that there's this very strong fundamentalist bloc in our country that operates very efficiently and has gotten stronger because we have gotten stronger. It's almost like a parallel movement. As we progress, so do they. Every time we win a bill in Congress or get domestic partnerships in this city, they are inspired to work even harder to oppose that. And we have to recognize this. And I want the gay community not to forget that the fundamentalist bloc is very much alive and working. Whether it's in a small community, like in Urda, Utah, or in Congress, like with congressmen like Bob Dornan, or in between, like Kathleen Bremner, holding her conferences locally for her community to push forward and exercise their beliefs. We need to remember that they're alive and well, because otherwise they're going to win. Well, am I reaching my gay audience? I'm not sure I am completely. I want to reach the gay audience that would rather just see a film that's about how great gay life is, about how many gay pride parades we can go to, about how many circuit parties we can go to, about only the good parts of our advancement. Those are all very necessary because I think we all need to be inspired to move on and fight. But sometimes there's a sense of denial that there's still a lot of work to be done. You know, it's as simple as going to vote, you know. This fundamentalist bloc is so powerful because they go vote. And we know our community sometimes just throws their hands up in the air and say, oh, why bother? You know, I can't do anything about this. That's why certain bills get passed that deny us certain rights in this country, because we don't exercise our power as citizens. There's no reason why we shouldn't get certain bills passed to our advantage to help us with our civil cause. But it's not happening all the time. Sometimes, but not all the time. We're losing more battles than we're winning, than we should be winning. And there's a reason for that, because there's a level of complacency in our community that has set in because all we want are the happy stories. You know, we'll put those in the centerpieces. We'll put those on opening night and closing night. You know, whereas films like mine get kind of like placed in the secondary slots. You know, I am complaining. I'm not complaining that that happens, but I'm complaining that the focus, that kind of focus is in line with the complacency. You know, if we choose to focus on boy toy films as the opening night feature, and that's the one we celebrate, well, that's what the community thinks we should be celebrating. Whereas if we focus on a film that's serious and insightful and challenging the status quo of not only the dominant culture, but our own culture, then people would think, oh, that's important too, you know. It's a matter of emphasis, and the festivals are playing along with this complacency because the audience wants it.
The audience
You know.
is supposed to corporate sponsors.
Yeah,
want more.
you know, as opposed to fighting that trend. You know, we often say for TV producers in discussions, and especially in terms of audience and what they want, you know, producers say, well, that's what our audience wants. You know, but then often producers or critics of media and television programming say, yeah, but if that's all you feed them, that's all they're going to want. If you don't challenge them, how do they know to be challenged? You know? So now I think and look at the covers of our magazines. Right? I mean, that's enough said. How many times are we going to be inspired by Melissa Etheridge and Ellen DeGeneres? Yes, they're inspiring. No question about that. But is that all? You know, there's a lot more.
Winding down here, so I'm going to ask you to think of some things that stand out most in your mind. One, in terms of your audience, you've been traveling to film festivals. Has there been a person that struck you the most, come up to you and said something about watching Family Fundamentals? Tell me anything you can think of.
Well, I think back a couple years ago, actually before I finished this film, it was at the University of Wyoming in Laramie. I was invited there to show License to Kill after the death of Matthew Shepard. And it was a packed screening, not only of students from the gay community, but also fundamentalists came to see the screening. And I remember one question was, what was I working on next? And I explained to them that I'm thinking of this film, which is now Family Fundamentals. And a woman came up to me afterwards and she said, I'm a fundamentalist. I have a gay son, and it was devastating. But I've learned to accept him, but my family doesn't. We've been ostracized by my family and extended family And she started crying. She goes, "This is horrible." And I said, "Well, what's the answer to this?" She says, "The answer is love. You know, we just have to love one another as we're taught to." And I kind of thought, oh yeah, you know, is it that simple? You know, Kathleen Bremner loves her daughter and her family, so it's not that simple. I think, you know, we often use the word homophobia, you know, and for me it doesn't say it all. Homophobia implies a certain involuntary psychological disorder of fear. It doesn't acknowledge the very deliberate conditioning that our society places upon us as citizens of the world. You know, conditioning in educational settings, in the media, in the churches. You know, that's very deliberate with a purpose, and that is to propel this contempt for homosexuality. So that's, I'm going away from your question, but her coming up to me was very important in inspiring this project.
What would you say was the most difficult aspect of making Family Fundamentals? And then next to that, what do you think in your mind is the most powerful moment in the film that you've created?
I think if you talk to any independent social issue documentary filmmaker and ask them what's the most difficult process of the making, it's the funding. You know, it's the money part. But that's boring. Who wants to hear about that? But that was difficult. It was difficult, as it was difficult to raise money for License to Kill, as it was difficult to raise money for Coming Out Under Fire. In that, I didn't take a necessarily one-sided point of view, that I was challenging points of view, that I wasn't necessarily coming from a liberal point of view, nor a conservative one, that I challenged both sides to look at each other. And I think sometimes it's hard to realize that, you know, that's worthwhile because you want to push your cause forward. And foundations and funding entities have an agenda. They have a criteria. They have issues they want to push forward and fix with their money. And they have every right to control that. So when I come around with this thing about, well, but I want to respect and acknowledge, you know, the more conservative point of view, it's kind of like, what? So with all my, especially my last three projects where I tried to expand the discourse on gay issues to include the conservative point of view as well in a respectful manner. That's been difficult to convince funders to accept as worthwhile. It's like, why would you give them airtime? You know, why would you give them a forum to speak their point of view, which we totally disagree with? But my feeling is we really need to understand them in order for us to plan our attack. You know, if we really want to chip away at the hardcore anti-gay attitudes in this country and our society at large, we really need to know minutely, in detail, why there are these feelings about us. Why are why are there beliefs about us in a certain way? And that's what I try to do in my work, is to chip away at that, to look at the core. I don't think I've reached the core yet, because it's so complicated. So it's been difficult convincing people, as I plan these projects, to think along those lines, especially funders. But I'm happy to say that usually, well, I'm saying that with this new film, I'm happy to say that funders actually come around after I finish the film, after they've denied me funding, saying to me, boy, we wish we gave you money. So partly it's probably my fault that I didn't do a good enough job in the proposal writing to convince them that this is something that should be funded. But I think it's also a resistance to challenging oneself and one's beliefs in order to propel your own agenda forward.
Would you feel comfortable telling me where, in your personal background, the sense of wanting to chip away at this anti-gay feeling in this country comes from?
Well, it comes from this whole notion of, well, why does someone feel that they have the right and the prerogative to yell faggot at me? out in the street as I'm going to my car. I mean, it's like, what? Where do they come from? Why are they motivated to do this? And what are they going to accomplish? It's like, it baffles me. Why someone would want to do that or think they have the right to do that? And carrying it to the extreme, of course, killing, as I did try to explore in License to Kill. You know, it just mystifies me because I'm not doing that to anybody. You know, I'm not harming anybody. I'm not harassing anybody. You know, what is it? That's what pushes me forward in all my work, is the questioning. The questioning of the construction of this contempt we have for homosexuality in our society. You know, where does it come from? It's just, and I think I'm finding answers here and there, but I don't know. I don't think I'll have the answer in my lifetime, or maybe I won't see the changes that I want to see in my lifetime, because it's so deeply ingrained. You know, even in our own minds, it's deeply ingrained. We know that the internalized homophobia that we have is so deeply ingrained.